Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to sit down with us today. Welcome back. If you guys had come to our Fireside Chat Part 1, we're now moving into our Part 2 of a series and want to introduce you to a couple people that will be speaking through some specifics around Azure Sentinel integration, and more importantly, the partnership side of the integration and how partnerships are extremely important as we grow as an organization, but more importantly, from a technology perspective. So again, I'd love to give a warm welcome to Trent. He is a security CSA from Microsoft and an Azure Sentinel Global SME. And more importantly, husband, dad, and first-time grandfather. As well, I wanted to introduce to you Scott Reiser, who is a senior solutions architect specializing in Microsoft 365 and Azure platforms. I will have to say, as a pizza lover myself, Scott claims to have perfected the homemade pizza, so I will be gladly taking on the challenge to see if anything happens. But I will say for myself, I am dairy free, which ruins all pizza in general. But I will say moving forward that it is a very good feat, and I love pizza. It's probably my go-to. So without further ado, again, I want to make sure that we answer a lot of questions throughout this Fireside Chat Part 2. But to kick it off, what I'd love to do is to really get some feedback from Rod specifically to tell us a little bit further around the approach with regard to Azure Sentinel, specifically being more of a plug and play. As they came to market, it was about ease of use. It was about really simplifying organizations to collect data, to collect and analyze that. But more importantly, why do you believe it's keeping things simplified and easy to integrate, a key component to Sentinel?
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Yeah, as noted, I'm Rod Trent, and I appreciate that everybody still keeps using that profile picture of me with the hat. That's awesome. There's a whole story behind that. But anyway, yeah, I appreciate that question as well. Before we get started, though, I don't know who remembers the kids' game musical chairs. That's kind of what I felt like as we had the music playing in the beginning there. I thought the music would play, and I was starting to get into it. And then it would stop. I, felt like I just had to grab my chair before somebody else got it. But anyway, I appreciate that question. So plug and play. I've had a thought about this over time, as you can imagine. Most Microsoft folks generally think about weird things at all times. Plug and play to me is not necessarily one of those things I totally, completely agree with. I think that's a really awesome goal for any software vendor or any organization to try to attain. And while, yes, absolutely, from an Azure Sentinel development perspective, we are trying to make it as absolutely easy as possible for our customers to be able to connect everything from anywhere, whether it's other clouds or on premises or even Azure itself. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for our customers to secure their environments. This whole plug and play concept, I think that's kind of over-promising to some respect. Not everything can be just a couple clicks. Sometimes they're based on, and I'm pretty sure Scott will be able to attribute to this as well, there's a lot of effort sometimes. There's a few things, yeah, absolutely. It's easy to connect, easy to integrate, but because organizations utilize a myriad of devices and applications and software and different perspectives, and even their approaches are different sometimes from security, it's difficult to kind of promise this plug and play without potentially some work involved and some effort, right? Again, plug and play is kind of this, I think, over promising. Let's just literally make it easier, and let's just make it acceptable and let it meet the requirements of every organization, I think.
Yeah, it's a great, it's a great point. Plug and play reminds me of, when USB first came out. It was very simple and very easy according to everyone, but yet, one of the largest at the time security risks for most organizations to lock those things down. But it kind of brings up a really good point, because integrations and making sure that the technology that you purchase, specifically in this case Azure Sentinel, really drives adoption, and more importantly, the data that you want to receive from an outcome perspective. Scott, maybe you can talk a little bit further, because what are you hearing from customers today about capabilities around Sentinel and what they're seeking with regards to integration specifically around that Microsoft stack?
Yeah, so what we're hearing from customers is that they want a SIM product that integrates easily. It has a low barrier to entry. I agree with Rod that plug and play is probably an overpromise, but they want ease of integration. So having those connectors there that feeds information into their SIM to provide the most data as possible is going to give them good patterns out of that data. Like any data warehouse, it's only as good as the information that's coming into it and the patterns that can be identified in that data. So the more sources that integrate into any SIM, but Sentinel specifically, is really going to drive adoption. Additionally, one of the barriers to entry that we see with some SIM products is that there's just an uncertainty about the costs, and that's not unheard of with Sentinel either. It can be a complicated process, and that's one of the things that we work with our customers to overcome, to understand the data that should be pulled into it, as well as what may not need to be pulled into it. Again, getting back to the right data for what you want out of your product.
Yeah, it's very key. It's funny you say, and it's a lot of organizations still today have many bespoke technologies to solve one challenge or a couple challenges or specific challenges that they're actually facing with, hence why they go out and look at other technologies. I think it's important to, and where we're seeing a lot of the organizations in the industry start to switch or at least pivot, is looking at how to consolidate, and integration is going to be a key component to that. And that integration will be very key to long-term success as you get more complex, as data becomes more relevant, and more importantly, how partnerships, both internal and external, are very key to that statement. Staying on that, Scott, maybe you could talk a little bit further around, why do you feel customers have really not adapted to Sentinel right now? Coming from the partner channel, what does that look like? We see things at Difenda, but at the same time, is where do you see some of that stopgap? And then what we could do is maybe turn it to Rod, and we can talk a little further around where are some of those things that we can help as organizations to be able to drive that adoption.
Yeah, so feeding on the one point I hit on earlier was the uncertainty of costs. It can seem daunting to some customers, and that's one of the things that we help with. But another is just the lack of awareness of the key capabilities of the platform. Being that Sentinel is cloud-based, there's occasionally misconceptions that Sentinel is only Azure-based or only cloud-based, but that's just, or has limited functionality with integration on-premise, and that just isn't true. The amount of connections, both in Azure and the Microsoft stack, of course, but also into other cloud providers like AWS and to on-premise systems like Cisco Meraki, VMware, heck, even Carbon Black and CrowdStrike, those integrations are there. And a lot of customers aren't aware of that. To Rod's point earlier, that there's an ease of connectivity to these platforms that customers just aren't aware of. And that's one of the areas that, that we have to do a little bit of education with our customers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And there's definitely always misconceptions specifically around capabilities. And then going through due diligence is always, again, not solving a specific challenge, but what can this product solve, not only for my one challenge, but possibly other challenges, and really get the use of that specific product specifically. Now,
there's also a misconception of overlap with things like Azure Monitor and Azure Log Analytics, or even Security Center, and kind of dispelling those, because they're related products and there is a little bit of overlap, but they're all complementary to one another. And also going through that education process, and I'm sure Rod's encountered that many times.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing, Rod. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. I think the last time we had the chat, we talked a little bit more about that education and that adoption and where customers see a lot of that value. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because the potential of overlap is not necessarily true, but the integration piece is very key. Maybe you could talk through that.
Right. So education from our partnerships and from our partners is absolutely one of the most critical things that I think is important from this perspective. So to me, there's like 4 levels of partners that are important from, the health of a product like this, right? So we have the integration, which we've kind of been talking about, software integration. There's obviously the consulting, the deployment, the architecture, right? There's also the MSSP, right? The managed security service provider. These organizations that can go to a customer and say, hey, you can outsource all or just, pieces of your security that we can manage for you. But there's also this custom content development, which I think is key to what we're talking about, right? So it's this education. We have a number of customers that are interested in Azure Sentinel because they've utilized our other security services, right? Our security.microsoft.com. They're like, oh, so what's this Sentinel thing? I can have a central console for all this other stuff, plus all the stuff that I'm utilizing on premises. But then there's this other faction of customers, those that have been deeply embedded and deeply invested in their current security tools for a long time, right? Azure Sentinel is, for all intents and purposes, the new kid on the block. It's come a long way in 2 years, just based on customer response and request, but it is the new kid on the block. It's not always existed. So there is quite an investment in a lot of these customers in their other kind of, I refer to them as legacy seams. And the only reason why I refer to it as legacy, because it's kind of an old legacy mentality that you literally have to collect and connect anything and everything from everywhere. And that's absolutely not the case. So part of that education that we're really, really wanting to rely on our partnerships for is this mentality shift, right? You don't have to collect and connect everything, which speaks back to kind of that cost discussion we were having earlier. Every discussion I have with a customer, within the first 10, 15 minutes, they look at Azure Sentinel, they absolutely love it, they think it's cool. It all turns to cost, right? And so from their perspective, they're coming from the approach of knowing what their current situation costs, knowing their current contract lock-in, which is all annual or whatever. They know that what their costs are. They're like, oh my goodness, I know how much this type of tool costs. What's Azure Sentinel going to cost for me? Well, you have to re-educate a little bit to a more modern approach to how you connect, how you collect the logs, and how you analyze those logs, because there's intelligence that's built into Azure Sentinel very specifically that enables customers to be able to do more with less. Yeah, the more you have, the better off you're going to be, but at the same time, you don't necessarily need as much as you needed with those legacy tools.
Yeah, and that means less tuning, because now we have to filter out less noise from the patterns that are being generated, you know?
Yep.
I think it also goes to that, the evolution of technology as a whole, providing machine learning, again, large words, AI, large word, buzz, but at the same time is providing the right outcomes, right? Not just providing the acronyms, providing the information that sounds really pretty, but more importantly is providing those outcomes, and goes back to what you're saying, Rod, is educating organizations. And what we see, even at Difenda, at the same time is we're always open to putting it side by side, right? Making sure that people understand the capability. And what a lot of organizations don't understand is that integration with Microsoft specific technologies, usually depending on your licensing model, could be at no cost, which is exciting because now you can actually do a side by side comparison to see what you are getting and what you would like to see, and have a good old time playing around. And then leveraging CDI and or Difenda and other partners out there specifically to really provide you guidance, how you can maximize this technology, close some of those gaps, fundamentally fill a challenge that you may be having, and then more importantly, trying to maximize that investment. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, Rod, I'll turn it to you specifically. One of the things that we talked about, and you kind of touched a little bit about it just now, specifically around legacy SIMs, right? You go back 20 years and to where it's coming to now, there's a lot of different ways or different approaches to do the same thing sometimes. Again, with technology evolving, there's better ways of doing it for sure to streamline that, but there is some things. So when you think about like the integration approach with Microsoft, not only with just third parties, but like, again, the connectors and the ability to drive, again, what I would say marketplace type connections and partnerships to ensure that customers have those out of box functionality that Microsoft really trying to evolve on. What are your thoughts on that? Maybe you can educate the viewers a little bit more of what does that look like? Why is Microsoft putting out so much emphasis on that partnerships today, and why is it important to customers?
Well, when you think about what we have attempted to do, at least over, let's say, the last 5 years, right? We've had a kind of a confusing story around security. Obviously, security is top of mind, but when customers look at what we have done, literally every service that we have has its own security console, right? So a lot of customers are probably aware. If not, we're putting some mighty efforts behind even consolidating those into a single console at security.microsoft.com. But taking that even a step further, those are our own services, right? Taking that an even step further, when you look at Azure Sentinel, I mean, Azure Sentinel, that's the name of this product, but in respect to what it actually is, it's a security platform. That's literally it. I kind of look at Azure Sentinel, this platform, as like the space station, where you have all these countries that come and connect, and they all work together in space. Azure Sentinel is literally the same type of thing. You should be able, from your security operations for your environment, be able to connect everything that you have, every asset that is important to your business, to a central location, to a platform, and be able to manage it and operate from there. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with Azure Sentinel, because while we have that centralized console, or working on it for our customers for the security services, Azure Sentinel takes that console and then invites all of the other services, other security tools, other on-premises devices, other clouds, anything that is important as an asset to the business. You should be able to connect to Azure Sentinel to be able to get a really good wide scale overview of the entire environment without having to work extra hard to be able to accomplish that. So this is literally a platform. I think I mentioned this last time. I'll mention it again. My best example, it's the tofu of security products, right? Everybody knows what tofu is. Tofu takes on the taste of whatever you cook it with. Azure Sentinel, just based on what you connect, how you react, how you work with it, it becomes your tool. Over time, 3 months from now, you stand up Azure Sentinel, it's going to look so much different than when you stood it up, because it's going to operate just exactly the way that you want it to, based on your connections and your operations in that tool.
I agree with you. A lot of people have to go through that experience too as well to really understand that. Again, there's been some FUD in the industry for quite some time of like, again, ingest everything. If you get it there, it will work. And I think it's important for people to understand and experience that capability, and it goes into like the evolving and ever increasing technology and what that's bringing to bear. Not to mention a lot of the dollars Microsoft is really putting into each and every one of their products, specifically around security as a whole. I mean, Microsoft's go-to-market strategy is that they are a security vendor, and that's important to know because that's always going to be top of mind and for the very near future and beyond. Scott, let me just switch gears a little bit because I think it's important to understand, just so that everyone on the call understands, Difenda has a partnership strategy as well to be able to provide organizations the outcome that they're looking around, specifically around Microsoft, and that's a very key component. And with the capabilities of CDI and their entire Microsoft platform, along with their practice, was a very, very easy, specific relationship and partnership with them. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about the partnerships and how they play an integral role at CDI, and what does that look like in the future as well?
Yeah, I mean, so CDI is a solutions provider. We don't manufacture hardware or software. And as technology integrators, we see ourselves as, enabling and accelerating data center modernization, digital transformation. But we need partnerships to do that because we're not a manufacturer. So because of the breadth of its leading technologies, Microsoft is one of those strategic partners because, to Rod's point, it's that kind of integration hub. Microsoft has invested loads of money into its strategic partnerships, and those partnerships mirror our own. VMware as a partnership, we're the only globally. We're the only partner that holds all 7 master service competencies with VMware, and that ties into our entire Microsoft conversation. Things like VMware on Azure and what have you. Citrix also ties into Azure Sentinel and several other products, Cisco, etc. There are so many integration points and partnerships that Microsoft has built up, and they mirror nearly all of our own. So it's an obvious tie-in to our strategy to mirror Microsoft's and kind of compound the investments Microsoft has made with our own expertise.
I concur. I would agree with that. I think that at a business level, it's very important to understand where your focus is going to be. And as an organization that is primarily focused on the Microsoft stack here at Difenda, it's very key to be sure that where we partner with our organizations and what we lean on our partnerships are very, very key and very important. Because at the end of the day, they're also bringing out new and improved features, on a daily basis, both on partnership levels and the technology side. And I think that really ties well, a segue into like Rod. And I think one of the questions last Fireside chat was like, what's coming next? Maybe you can give me some peak, information. What can I expect? And you go, wait a second, NDA, got to be careful. Let's not go there yet. But I think it's important to talk through that, not necessarily what's coming, but why is it that Microsoft is coming out every single week with new events? Why are they doing that? What is pushing them to go faster so organizations can take advantage of the platform so that they don't have to customize it as much more out of the box?
So this really does speak to a different level of partnership that we have, right, at Microsoft. This is a partnership with our customers. While we have the other partnerships, we're absolutely important. I think we all kind of work together from these integration partners and consulting partners. We're all working to partner with our customers. When you look at what we're doing from an Azure Sentinel perspective, the health and strength of this product, as I mentioned early on, It's been released about 2 years, I think September 2019, something like that. It was released publicly. And if you looked at it then, you're like, oh yeah, this is probably a Microsoft 1.0 product. But over the past 2 years, as you mentioned, there's literally a new feature or new enhancement or a little nuance that gets released almost weekly and definitely several monthly. And there's a very significant reason behind that. That's our partnership with the customers. We run a very successful, very strong private preview program. We have a number of customers that are part of that. And everything that you see in Azure Sentinel since that September 2019 release, well, I'd say about 90%. I'm not going to say everything. I'm not doing the overpromise, underdeliver thing. Almost about 90% of the things that you see that exist in there, they were touched, at least in some respect, by our customers. Either it was through a recommendation, or it was our customers actually using this stuff in private preview to give us recommendations and responses and help us build a better product. So this is the strength of Azure Sentinel and that partnership with our customers. What you see today is absolutely based on what our customers have asked for and recommended. When we initially released Azure Sentinel out of the gate publicly, it was based on the knowledge that we knew, the gaps in the existing, those legacy security tools and the gaps that we understood because we use this product. Now what you see today is what exist because of the gaps that our customers have identified from the tools that they're using. So going forward, it's that partnership with our customers that's going to build this into a product that I've said this a couple times, maybe not publicly, but I think Microsoft is actually reinventing the scene. You talked about the AI and the machine learning buzzwords, right? 10 years ago, yeah, absolutely, they were buzzwords. 10 years ago, I didn't work for Microsoft, right? I was a Microsoft user, a Microsoft customer. And at the time I thought AI, ML, oh, whatever, right? But it's been working with Azure alongside with Azure Sentinel that has finally allowed me to actually see how these buzzwords actually work. And it really is stuff that works. And it's built into the product to build intelligence. Again, we are creating something here that is absolutely, I promise you, revolutionize this type of tool, this type of security tool.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, again, it goes back to as well with experience. And again, we were also part of the preview way back when into, 2 years plus around the design help around, getting some feedback with customers. But I agree with you. It came down to experience, really just getting people to touch and feel that ML, that AI, the opportunities where Microsoft is really changing the game. And I always say, instead of competing head to head, why not just change the game? It's kind of what I tell everyone. Instead, again, the whole saying of let's compare apples to apples. Why don't we just compare apples to cars? Because that's where we're going to get to. And that's really by changing the game and then changing the way that people operate these technologies will always be very key. Scott, on your side, because again, you're hearing from a lot of customers, as is Rod, as is ourselves. Tell us a little bit more about where you see, because again, the adoption of Azure Sentinel is coming. We see a lot of people going there today. Right? We're having multiple different conversations. Microsoft's having those conversations. Everyone's kind of, collectively having those conversations. Where do you see Azure Sentinel playing a role with the future at CDI? How is that going to benefit your customers? Where do you see that going moving forward?
Again, kind of reiterate some of what we've already touched on. Sentinel integrates into a wide variety of technologies, and most of them, if not all of them, are key partnershies of ours and are key partners of our customers. And being that there are connectors for all of those technologies, or many of those technologies, it allows us to get better data and only the most relevant data into Sentinel. So with Microsoft continuing to drive that development, it's a key differentiator in the space. And it's Microsoft. Microsoft's prominence in the IT space makes them an obvious integration partner. nobody truly wants to go head to head with Microsoft. To very much to Rod's point, it's easier to collaborate with and develop a completely new ecosystem together. And that's what most of our partners are doing, and we see customers adopting that strategy as well.
Same thing here, Rod. I think this is also very key because that integration piece is important, like we've talked about. Where do you find a majority of customers? Like, what is the, where do they get hung up on specifically when it comes to sometimes bespoke environments and how Azure plays an integral role? Scott kind of hit it a little bit at the beginning, specifically saying maybe the misconception is that it only works in Microsoft environments or only works in the cloud, but not on a hybrid environment. Where do you see some of that challenges from customers? Because we see it as well, but where do you see it?
So that's absolutely a piece of it, right? A lot of customers, they look at Azure Sentinel, it's cloud-born, right? It's cloud developed. It only has ever existed in the cloud. It's not like some of our competitors who existed on-prem and then they decided to use somebody else's cloud to provide their cloud services, right? We maintain this cloud, Azure, right? But it is kind of a misconception sometimes to think that Azure Sentinel is only a Microsoft solution or only an Azure solution. It's really, really easy, and we hit on this in the beginning, to connect AWS to Azure, right? To Azure Sentinel. It's really easy to connect Google Cloud or Oracle or IBM, whatever you want to call it, right? We can go down the long list of items. It's easy to connect your on-premises assets, whether it's Palo Alto, Cisco, some of your other security tools. And in respect to that, I think that's probably even more of an important message to kind of hone in on. It's not just that we can connect and collect anything from anywhere, but it's that we want our customers to be able to just literally bring what they have today. It's not an all or nothing scenario. Azure Sentinel exists. We're not trying to force everybody to use Azure Sentinel and move off of their SIEM. We have a number of customers that use things like other SOAR capability or use some on-premises tools. Maybe they're using one of the competitive tools on-prem. It's not like, okay, you want to use Azure Sentinel, you just have to throw everything out the door. We have a number of customers that use Azure Sentinel and other tools side by side. There's enough of a cost savings just by ingesting cloud stuff to Azure Sentinel instead of the egress cost of exporting it out of the different services through API to their on-prem stuff. There's enough cost savings for customers to be able to run those things absolutely side by side. Some customers run them side by side, maintaining two consoles. Some customers decide, okay, let's send the cloud stuff to Azure Sentinel. Let's let Azure Sentinel use its intelligence and AI and stuff to do its job. And then we're just going to ship the alerts to our on-prem tool because that's actually less data to send outside the cloud. It's going to cost us less. So it's not an all or nothing scenario. We want our customers to secure their environments. We understand their investments, right? Again, Azure Sentinel is the new kid on the block. We don't want our customers to have a gap that is caused by a gap in deployment, right? You shut down your current systems, you try to learn the new one, and there's that whole air gap of security. We don't want that to happen. Bring what you have. There's a number of providers, security providers today. It's absolutely so easy to connect it to Azure Sentinel, even the SOAR capability. You don't have to use Azure Sentinel SOAR capability, but it's really easy because we have created this uniform industry standard way of connecting data. You can connect that data to Azure Sentinel, but you can also export that data outside to on-premises or other clouds if you want to do that as well. So again, not an all or nothing scenario. Let's just make this fit and work for you.
Agreed. I think that that is a huge misconception that it's an all or nothing. I think that's the biggest thing that we've also heard as well. Outside of the cloud-based and on-prem, etc., but it's not an all or nothing, because if that was the case, most people wouldn't have bespoke technologies, right? And that's the thing, is at the end of the day is They knew that they were solving some type of a challenge, like I said from the beginning. And so they went out to the market to find something that would help control that gap and make sure they continue to be secure. And I think that's the same mentality that Microsoft is still coming to the table with, but sometimes is a little clouded from the customer's point of view, not so much Microsoft's point of view, right? I think that's very, very key. Scott, maybe talk us a little bit further around the strategy, specifically around how your team helps within Azure in general, and how Azure Sentinel is playing a role to that, but also around just like that Azure specific space that you guys sit within.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the key integrations that we're utilizing, hover around Azure, as well as the Microsoft 365 stack. So integrating those two and, pulling in alerts and monitoring from the Azure stack and correlating those with information coming in from the Microsoft 365 stack allows us to have a more comprehensive view of the security posture of what's going on in the entire environment. And then when we hybridize that with our on-prem, again, we're maximizing the information that's coming out of it. I mean, we may be focused on the Azure environment or Microsoft 365, what have you. But because we're able to pick and choose and work in essentially collaboration or in parallel with other technologies, we're able to target the information that we want to get out of the system. We're not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. We're crafting a solution that the customer truly wants instead of jamming a specific methodology down their throats.
Yeah, I see that too. And I thank you for that. I was going to say, in preparation for this specific event, it was something that I kind of thought through of like, really, I'm always interested in the personal side of everyone too. Rod, Scott, I mean, I got into a little bit of the pizza. I got into a little bit more first-time grandfather. Great. So maybe we can talk a little bit about, I would say, the geek, the nerd, which we all kind of have because we're in this field together. What is your favorite aspect? And Rod, I'll start with you because you're living and breathing within Azure, Sentinel specifically as subject matter expert. What are maybe a couple of functions that you're like, wow, like this is incredible? Like even for myself, like this is earth-shattering. Maybe just to me, but it's really interesting that they've gone down this direction. Maybe you can kind of give us a little bit about your person.
That's awesome. Really on the spot type of question. I appreciate that. Kind of like that whole musical chairs thing. It kind of took me off kilter there for a second. However, I always have responses to everything. So the first thing, I'm going to start with a recommendation. Just anyone that wants to listen in, I would absolutely, and this is my geek area, right? This is my absolute geek area. I would recommend that anyone and everyone that wants to work with anything data centric in the cloud, whether it's Azure Sentinel or whether it's Intune or whether it's some of our other security products or anything data centric within Azure, you absolutely must get some training on KQL. Learn Kusto query language. If you happen to be around me any point of the day after work, what I do to relax, my favorite TV show, absolutely still of all time, is The $6 Million Man. NBC, the NBC app, you can stream that at any time. I can stream any episode. If I've had a bad day at work and I just really need to veg, I'm going to take my laptop, sit on my bed, watch $6 Million Man, and write KQL queries. I don't know what it is. It's my personality. I absolutely love, I think all the way from as a kid, I loved Hardy Boys mysteries. It's like this hunting, looking, digging for gold type stuff, right? So KQL is awesome. The second piece specifically for Azure Sentinel, I think that just constantly wows me because it's so simple, but it's so powerful. we introduced in public preview maybe a couple months ago is our automation rules. We've always had SOAR capability through our playbooks that are built on logic apps, and you can create some amazing automation. But just this introduction of this very simple one pane automation solution to be able to manipulate automation behind all of our analytics rules at once, or a couple or whatever, it's just it's incredible. Every day somebody asks me a question, because I support Azure Sentinel internally as well. People are always, Rod, what this, what that, and a lot of times it's hey, just created a automation rule around this. Like I said, it's so simple. You open it up, try to create one, you're like, this is stupid. But oh my goodness, if you just use your brain, use a little creativity, you can create some awesome capabilities.
That's great, and I love to put you a little bit of everyone on the spot, but I wanted to make sure that it's aligned to a lot of where I know you have a lot of expertise. Same thing for you, Scott. Like, where do you see that? Because I know you've been with the organization for quite some time at CDI. You're really focused on Azure and Microsoft and that entire stack. What about yourself? Like, where do you find a lot of the expertise that you bring?
I was, just to give a little story. I was at a Microsoft security EBC event in the before times, before COVID, and just a kind of statistic stood out to me, and it kind of stopped me in my tracks, because obviously everybody is aware, Windows is one of the most prolific operating systems out there, and Defender has been in that operating system for a very long time. And Defender is sending telemetry data up to the Microsoft the Microsoft security stack, and some of that is obviously feeding into the development of Sentinel and how its logic works. But I think it was over 30 million endpoints are feeding telemetry data into the Microsoft security stack, and that just blew my mind, because all of that information is feeding into the machine learning that goes into the logic that Rod's talking about. And Microsoft eats its own dog food. They're using that information to perform hunter-seeker missions in their security stack, and just the sheer amount of data just blew me away, and I'm still awed by it, 16 months after the fact.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And just so everyone's aware too as well, be sure to ask any questions. We're here to help, specifically answer anything that we can around the Azure Sentinel platform integrations, our partnerships. So please be sure to submit those so that we can help you understand a little bit further. And as we move into our last question, or our last question for myself, Rod, maybe you can talk to us a little bit more about what do you think, or what would you say to customers that are actually starting to think about Azure Sentinel? What would be a process so that they're ready to kind of take that next step? Because again, thinking through integrations and partnerships and their entire stack of technologies, they have to be ready. So what would you say to customers today and getting ready for that?
Yeah, so for those that don't know, we have a 31-day trial for Azure Sentinel. Really easy to stand up. There's a number of the data connectors, our first-party services, things like MCAS, Defender, 365 Defender, and things like that are free ingestive sources. You can literally stand up Azure Sentinel and enable those data connectors for 31 days for free, right? So you kind of get a chance to get some experience, click around. I would recommend, however, while that sounds really neat, a 31-day trial, I would recommend that customers commit to that 31-day trial. A lot of customers will stand that up, 31 days is up, They haven't had a chance. They've been too busy. They didn't get other people in their environment involved on their security teams. Nobody tested it. And they come back and say, hey, can we get another 31 days, right? You absolutely can. I'll just kind of give that to you now. However, make the commitment. Reach out to a partner and say, look, we're going to do this 31-day trial. This is kind of it's a free POC, but solicit a partner to come in and check in every once in a while. Ask questions. Okay, this looks neat, but because if our customers start clicking around and they don't understand what they're doing, they're not going to come back to it, right? Like I said, make that commitment, set that time aside to be able to do that, solicit a partner to help you with that, answer your questions, give you that education, help you with that mindset, changing that mindset with what you're historically used to utilizing for those on-premises tools. That's what I would recommend. So it's awesome, 31-day trial. You're like, oh, Microsoft, thank you. But again, make that commitment and solicit a partner so that you can actually get something valuable out of it.
Perfect. I think that's a perfect segue into my, more of my latter comments before I move to like the last comment or question for Scott. And for everyone that's part of this and anyone's being, to come to the Fireside chat, whether that be from part 1, part 2, or just interested, definitely reach out to Difenda, definitely reach out to CDI. We're here to help you. And again, it goes back into what Rod was saying. Great, something is free. Let's take advantage of it. But at the same time, let's commit. And we're here to help you, right? We want to make sure that you guys do have the capabilities specifically to leverage that. And we can help stand that up, go through feeds, understand rule sets, understand how to threat hunt. What is that really going to provide you so that you can see a side-by-side comparison if you really have a SIEM today and or moving forward. Now, before I kind of move lastly over to Scott, we do have a question, which is fantastic. So the question was, does heartbeat and insight metrics data contribute to the billing in Azure Sentinel?
And I'm off mute, so I'll answer. I was actually getting ready to respond in the chat, but that's quite all right. I'm going to post something in the chat in response for just a second. So these, if you see this in the chat, these are our free ingested sources. This is the list. So we got logs for Azure Activity, Office 365 and Azure Activity, and there's the alerts that get ingested for free. So that's the free things that you can connect. Anything beyond these free things are going to cost something. That heartbeat that comes from that agent, that's enabled as part of either the security event or there's a couple other potential data connectors. That will cost something for ingest, right? So anytime you're moving data from any location to another, unless it's these resources, there's going to be a cost. The better discussion here, and absolutely you should reach out to one of our partners or Microsoft yourself. The better discussion here is best practices around this heartbeat, around this insight metrics. And in fact, insight metrics should never be part of the security discussion. That should go somewhere else completely. But again, that's kind of a best practices discussion that you should have with someone, because that's a longer discussion than we have here. So I apologize.
No, I think that's very valuable too as well. And it kind of provides guidance, again, going back into that Sentinel POC, is really going through that discussion with a partner to provide some excellence, provide best practices, provide what we've seen with customers, good, bad, and indifferent, to provide relevance to that specific environment, that specific customer. Very, very key. Same thing, and last thing for you, Scott, specifically around Azure Sentinel. What would you say for organizations that are looking at Azure Sentinel on the partner side? What do you suggest that they talk to CDI about? What do you think that they should talk about to a partner?
What's the business goal that we're trying to achieve? Because if we can't answer that question and we just try to ingest everything, we're not going to have a successful outcome because we don't know what the end goal was. So if we can establish what the business goal is, everybody wants to, ingest the event logs and pull in the firewall data, and that's great. We can absolutely do that. But why? Let's answer that why question in order to establish how we get to the end state. If we can answer that, everybody's going to have great outcomes.
Perfect. And again, I think the biggest thing from both Rod and Scott to summarize this is let's focus on the outcomes. Let's focus on what people are trying to achieve. Let's make sure that we understand what they need to achieve and then develop some success criteria around that. And again, going back to what Rod was saying, is commit. I think it's an easy word to say, it's a little harder to do. And so I think that if we commit to the success of, again, a potential POC, commit to a level of excellence, even if it's to roll out Sentinel, just commit to make sure that you can take advantage of all the great things that Sentinel and Microsoft have been doing with regards to integrations, with regards to partnerships, and be sure to leverage the partnership channel so that, again, we as a group can actually help drive relevance within your organization. And the most important piece is to make sure you're secure so that you have visibility to close those gaps, make sure you have controls in place, and maximize your investments when you guys buy into technology. So with that, with the last 4 minutes left, I want to thank everyone that has been a part of this Fireside Chat Part 2 with regards to our integration and partnership ecosystem. Rod, thank you very much again for coming abreast and really providing some guidance and knowledge and some excellence around your capabilities and understanding with Sentinel. And then again, Scott, thank you very much. We value your partnership. We value your excellence and the way that you guys come to market. And we look forward to working with both of you guys moving forward.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, I truly appreciate the opportunity. Obviously, you guys didn't get tired of me the first time, so hopefully, I'll be back. That'd be awesome. This is my favorite topic to talk about. Well, except for $6 Million Man in KQL, but
that's the next one, Rod.
That would be wonderful. And I would love, I think maybe the next one, maybe we can like a do-it-yourself pizza. Maybe Scott we just have a whole thing about how to make pizza.
The secret is a slow fermenting crust or a slow fermenting dough. I'm just saying.
All right.
Now you're talking my jam. All right, guys. Thank you very much, everyone that's attended. Thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to working with all of you guys. Talk soon.
Thanks a lot.